All right, guys. So we got another winter storm, so we're doing another Zoom call. That seems to be about when I got the time to do these. Uh, and today, speaking of winter storms, we're going to the Great White North. Uh, Gonna have a conversation with Blake Vince from Ontario, Canada. I met Blake, it would be 2023. I think that's when it was 2023. Met him down at No Till on the Plains. And when I listened to him speak, I was instantly like, wow, how was this guy off my radar? He just has a real good way of delivering his message. And so I just wanted to hop on here and have a conversation with him, kind of catch his story and share it with you guys. So with that, Blake, I'll let you give a little bit better introduction to yourself than that, as far as where you're from, and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, great. Well, like was mentioned, I am Canadian. I'm from what I refer to as deep southwestern Ontario, Canada. I'm approximately an hour east of Detroit, Michigan, driving, and 3 hours west of Toronto, Ontario. So I'm straight across Lake Erie from Cleveland, Ohio. Sort of to triangulate where I am, I always sort of lead with that to help the audience visualize where I'm located. So I'm right here in what they refer to as the Great Lake Basin. And this is old glacial lake bottom soil that we're on. Our topography is very, very flat. The original vegetation here would have been the whole landscape would have been covered once upon a time with a Carolinian hardwood forest. So that extends all the way down, the east side of North America. So you would have been covered with oak, ash, beech, elm, maple, all of those familiar hardwood species, and then, of course, the understory plants that would exist there. And from a biodiversity perspective, supposedly there would have been as much biodiversity here as there is currently in a Brazilian rainforest, which is hard to imagine because today the majority of the landscape is pretty barren and it's dominated by production agriculture. So typically the crops we grow here on our farm aren't uncommon to the Midwest, which are corn, soybeans, and winter wheat. That would be more unusual, I guess, as it pertains to a lot of agriculture is primarily an alternation between corn and soybeans in the US and not so much wheat anymore, but wheat is definitely part of our rotation. And I like to utilize that opportunity after wheat is harvested to plant a lot of big cover crops, which I'm sure we're going to talk about here at some point through the conversation this morning.
Um, what kind of understory was part of your native hardwood forest? Was it, I mean, when you're saying hardwood forest, it was basically full woodland. It wasn't really a savanna. It was trees, correct?
It was a flat out forest. There would have been outcroppings of what they refer to as oak savannas. And so an oak savanna would have had massive oak trees and then an understory of like grassland type species. Um, and and that's what it would look like. But underneath the floor, there's all kinds of different types of low growing plants, right? So more herbaceous type plants, not as much of like a wooded type of species, even though those would have existed as well. But you gotta imagine the canopy of the forest would have shaded out a lot of those plants. So you have to have plants that are going to be able to be somewhat shade tolerant for an extended period of time, right? And so in the spring of the year, like the native flower of Ontario is called the trillium, which is a low growing herbaceous type plant, and it has a distinctive either white or pink flower. So you've got those, and then once the tree is all out in full foliage, those plants they sort of get snuffed out, right, and they go dormant. But that's how the forest sort of ebbs and flows through the course of the season. Yeah.
So what about white-tailed deer? Did you guys have bison in your area?
So there supposedly there would have been like a woodland bison years ago. There would have been bear. There would have been wolves. Those would have been your primary predator type species. The odd cougar as well would have been floating through here too. But again, those have long since disappeared from the landscape. Right?
Right.
They've been hunted to extinction essentially, right? Uh, but yeah, those species here today. So now you still see lots of white-tailed deer on the landscape. We have lots of wild turkey. Luckily, there is some rumors of some wild hogs that have started to set in spots. I haven't seen any, touch wood, just as of yet, but there are areas in Canada that definitely have some issues with wild hogs.
Yep, yep. Nope, we're in the same boat in Kansas. Everything that I've heard is there's some in the southern end, but that they basically kept them there if there are any. So yeah, definitely don't want to get that started.
No,
Uh so so the farm that you're on now, did you grow up on the farm? Did your dad farm? How far back does your history go on the piece of ground that you guys are managing currently?
like most of us in North America, we are immigrants, regardless if we're living in the U.S. or we're living in Canada. I think that's always good to point out that we are nations of immigrants, right? I am a fifth generation farmer. My great great grandfather immigrated to Canada from England, and so I am I am lucky to live on the farm that my grandfather bought many years ago. I bought this farm from my aunt and uncle. My wife and I built a new house here a few years ago. Um, and my dad farmed alongside his two brothers for years. My grandfather passed away when I was just a kid in diapers, 1974. And the three of them, my dad and my two uncles, farmed together in a partnership. They all owned their own land, fortunately enough, and they had like a working partnership as it pertained to labor and shared machinery costs, right? And that worked really well up until the point where I sort of was coming on board, coming home from university, and I recognized the fact that everybody's getting older. My one uncle specifically that lived here on the home farm, he didn't encourage any of his kids to farm, and it was sort of like an estate planning type of exercise where we needed to get sort of affairs in order. Um, my uncle had had some health issues, and he was looking out as he should for his own wife and his own kids, not wanting to leave her in a mess for fear that he was to pass early, so to speak, right? So that sort of started the ball in motion to start some estate planning or planning for the future more so. And I recognized as well for the sake of my own wife that I didn't want to necessarily be in a partnership or have my wife necessarily have to be in a partnership with my uncles, with my aunts, with even with my own parents and my cousin and my cousin's wife. Not like, and it wasn't about being disrespectful. It's just that I just thought it was time to make a change, right?
Yep.
We
It complicates it. It
right,
complicates it.
exactly, and so, anyways, I made a hard call, a hard conversation with my dad, and I quite honestly said, Dad, I said I'm not interested in moving forward in a partnership, right? I'm interested in being your partner, but not necessarily having to be in a partnership with everybody else. And it just for simplification. And that decision was difficult, right? It created some anxiety amongst the partners, right? Because here now there's, and I think I think definitely as it has unfolded, it's been for the better because now we have two businesses that are standing on their own. Being my cousin continues to farm on his own, right? He has his own business. He's doing quite well for himself. And now I stand alone on my own 2 feet. We have our business that is doing fine as well. And in the event that going forward, if one of us finds ourselves not being a farmer, it's not going to be as cumbersome, right? To
Right.
exit, right? And so but it's a matter of swallowing your pride and saying, okay, we need to do this for all the obvious reasons. And the one common denominator that I touched upon is change. Nobody likes change. Change is difficult, right? And it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's your management practice, your business practice. Um, Nobody enjoys change. And so, and I don't know if I've really shared that story much openly as I have right now, but that's sort of how it all played out. And yeah, that's sort of a quick and dirty of where we
Right.
are today.
Yeah, no, like I said, yeah, I completely understand wanting to simplify it just in case of a worst case scenario, because the simpler it is, the less likely feelings are going to get hurt, especially when it comes to family.
Yeah.
I mean, my the that guy right there behind me, yeah, he farmed his whole life, and his it was in a family trust, and I won't go into details. It wasn't pretty when decisions were made, and he was an easygoing guy. Um, and but I don't know how he was. I don't know how he could have handled it without, and I'm sure he was. He just didn't let it bother him. But yeah, the sometimes it's easier to simplify things, and business dealings with family is definitely not the easiest thing to do. So,
Oh, totally. And it wasn't easy. Like, sure, and there was stress and there was anxiety and there was emotions that always get involved, right? But when we look back and the dust has settled, I think we made the right decision.
mhm.
And I'm at a stage where I'm looking at my own business now presently, and my two kids are young adults, right? They're in the stage of university education process. My daughter's just getting ready to finish her engineering degree, and I don't believe that she's going to be a farmer. The young man presently, right, is a city guy. He's from Toronto. He's an engineer as well. Um, and our son is in second year computer science. So their interest in agriculture has not been like mine. I grew up like most farm kids. I was pushing the toy tractor against across my mother's shag carpet. Okay. Uh, Old shag carpet, and I would rake it and make it look like cornrows standing up, and I would harvest that corn with my toy combine. Well, my son, his interests were in computer games and things like that growing up, right? He did not have the same affinity for agriculture. I was out in the barn, um, dealing with livestock. That was sort of had always been sort of more my interest. I would prefer dealing with animals than dealing with machinery, truthfully.
Yep.
Uh, that's sort of where my heart lies. I would rather have spent my time doing that than worrying about changing oil and fixing machinery that's broken. I would rather mend, the wings of a whatever, right? A, a Not that we had chickens, but I had more of a passion for cattle than I definitely did for machinery. And
Sure,
so
sure.
that's me, and that's how I'm wired, right? And so I look at my kids and I tell you this story because I'm not so sure that we're going to have a successor for our business, and we're going to have to deal with that at some point in time too, right? And we'll figure that out too as those cards unfold.
Yep, yep. Well, you're kind of giving everybody an idea of how old you are. You had shag carpet, but you were harvesting that shag carpet with a combine, not a corn picker, not
Yeah.
not not a picker. So the combines were around shag carpet, so we can kind of narrow that down a little bit. What did you go to college to major in?
So I went to school. So I was born in 1972. If everyone wants to do some quick math, I'll be 53. Full disclosure. I went to the University of Guelph in the early 90s. So the fall of 1991, I went down the road about 2 hours from home, the University of Guelph, which is seen as the agricultural academia center, right, for Canada. It's well regarded, and so I took a 2 year diploma in agriculture. Farm operators and managers was the title of my program. So that was a cross section of everything from production through to business courses. And then I decided I was going to stay on and work towards my degree in ag economics. And that primarily, I would have been better suited to do a Bachelor of Commerce. But tragically, the two colleges do not align, right? They would not recognize the BCom program. Falls outside of what's called the Ontario Ag College, Ontario Agricultural College, OAC, which is effective. And they would not recognize the transfer credits of the diploma program towards a Bachelor of Commerce in Agriculture. And a Bachelor of Commerce would have been more applicable for what I do on the farm as far as sales, marketing, accounting, things that would really translate moving forward. And so when I found myself doing a Bachelor of Science in agricultural economics, we start talking about supply demand curves for commodity based agriculture, and it doesn't resonate with this cowboy, right? And like, okay, and as we all know, there's so much manipulation in the market. If it was true supply demand and we have a drought and it
Right.
impacts, um, but when there's so many outside variables at play and people are buying commodities to to represent a large percentage of what they refer to as cash in a mutual fund portfolio, um, you know, the market the market is forever manipulated. So as a guy that's playing in this space of primary production, it was really hard for me to bring it down to the farm level of which I was familiar with. Okay, and so I quick.
Hold on. You broke up. We're going to pause this real quick, guys. Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go again.
So back up where we were. Um, so I left academia and I went into financial services. And so I got my licenses to sell investment products and things like that. And that was really good because what it taught me when dealing with people, consumers, as investors. So I was selling investment products like your 401k equivalent. I would be selling a product called a registered retirement savings plan, which would be a portfolio of investment products, mutual funds, guaranteed interest certificates, life insurance products, those sorts of things. But dealing with the average Joe consumer, it really taught me how people made wealth, not those that necessarily inherited wealth, but people that made wealth typically made it because they were tolerant of risk. They took risk at some point in time. And so that's sort of my academic background of where I've come from and why I think the way I do on the farm and how that translates into my thought process here as a farm manager, farmer today.
So, how many years were you doing that before you came back to the farm?
So so I did that while farming. So I,
Oh,
I
okay.
got started getting my licenses at Christmas time, 1994 is when I left university at the end of the semester. So in the spring of 95, I started getting my licenses for financial services. And I did that job up until about 2008, I think it was. I sold my book of business that I had built up there over that period of time. And then I went briefly into selling seed for one of the multinational seed companies that everybody's familiar with, a highly recognizable brand that I worked for as a summer student. And I realized that where the business was going and where I was going, we weren't on the same plane. Okay, and so because of that, and I also saw that I was brought in for that company to cultivate prospects. My manager at the time had a vision for how he thought that I could complement the other sales agencies, and he actually got taken out of his role of being the at the time the DSM and put back into a role of back to agronomy. And so his vision for how he thought that I could complement the other agencies fell by the wayside, right? And so, with that being said, I wasn't seen as an advantage or as a complement to the other sales agencies that surrounded me were all much larger. I was seen as a threat. Nobody wants to give up potential customers, even though they're not dealing with them because they have conflicts of whatever nature they might be,
Hmm.
right, person or otherwise. And so I could see the writing on the wall that I looked like my agency when they color coded the agencies. They did this exercise and went around and you had to say where Bill and Bob and Jim all lived, and so my territory looked like the inside of a donut, right? Old chocolate covered donut. And I was surrounded by all of these much larger agencies around me, and I could just see that I was going to get picked off, right, and absorbed without much effort. And my
Right.
my my competition was never the competition. My competition was my fellow sales reps that they saw me as a threat. They didn't see me as a compliment to help them out to take some work off of their shoulders, right?
Sure.
So anyways, with that being said, I quickly recognized that my time there in that role was going to be very short lived, and so I exited stage right.
Yep. Nope. I am sure that is a very common situation. And it's like you said, it's not going to be the competition that takes you out. It's your own company that are guys who are, you were a farmer selling seed, and it's going to be probably guys selling seed that aren't necessarily farming that they're pushing, and you're not pushing as hard. And so,
Yeah, it was a combination of all things actually, and but that's all right.
yep.
I learned again. I learned a lot. I learned a lot from my customers that I dealt with. I miss those relationships because when you're in sales, you don't have just the same excuse necessarily to call somebody up and have a visit, right?
Hmm.
And and so there's there are days where I miss that business, that part of my life that I had experienced, but I gleaned a lot from those days, regardless if they were in say seed sales or financial services that have you know taken me to where I am presently. So I have no regrets for the time or the energy I spent in both of those professions.
Well, yeah, you make me feel a little bit better about me dabbling in sales. So, yeah, it is some work, but you do, hopefully you get to make some connections and some people that you have connection just outside of the sales side of it, I guess.
Right, right. And it's and at the time, a little bit extra income at the time when you're trying to grow your business, and that doesn't hurt either, right? It gives you a little
Yeah.
bit of house stability, some stability, and like any young person getting started, right? You do things because not necessarily because you want to, but you need to.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, not necessarily because you want to, because you need to. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Absolutely. So, I know a little bit about your story. I know that your family had already been no-tilling, when you came back to the operation. But so when you came back to the operation, what was the catalyst for you taking the next step down
So yeah,
your soil health journey? What was the
yeah,
catalyst to start?
yeah. So for the audience sake, right? So my dad and my two uncles that I mentioned earlier that farmed together, they started no-till in 1983. Um, they did it because they had some soybeans that were in storage at a local cooperative. The cooperative goes into receivership. The creditor comes in and seized those soybeans that my dad and my uncle had in storage, right, as assets of the co-op. And so they looked at each other and said, "Holy shit! Like, what are we going to do?" We were selling those beans for spring input,
Hmm.
right? Whether it was diesel, whether it was herbicide, whether it was whatever. And they didn't have the older generation to fall back on because my grandfather had long since been gone, right? By almost 11 years by this point, and 10 years, I guess, almost 10 years, having passed away in 74. And this is 83, about, or 82, somewhere in there. And so they started down this path of no-till, right? They sold some machinery for some cash. I, I I look back on the situation for some short-term cash flow, and they started down this path of no-till. So fast forward, I come home from school. We're already long since doing no-till, and I'm home in the early '90s, and I'm in sales and building my own business, buying my own farm, and I just continued down this path because I knew that I don't own the machinery, and I'm being charged for the usage of said machinery. And I distinctly remember I'd rented a farm from a neighbor, and I was sharecropping, and so all of the associated costs as it pertained to land management were mine to bear. And I went away to go with some friends to a cottage, and my dad and my uncle decided to do two passes with a soil saver, like a chisel plow. Okay, Glencoe soil saver, and And I said, why did you do two passes? Because you're charging me for each pass you do, right? The diesel fuel, the tractor. It wasn't just like I'm working with my dad and dad gives you a free pass. No, I paid
Hmm.
my own. It wasn't like I was just taking money out of dad's fuel tank and my uncles had to get paid. So I had to pay my share too. So two passes. I said, I have to pay for those two passes. And then after your two passes of your primary tillage, you go in there, and every good farmer in our landscape, because we're so flat, they go in with what's called a land leveler. So it's an angle iron land leveler that you drag across the topography and you level everything smooth and flat and you leave it as a stale seed bed to be blown bare all winter long, right?
Right.
So all of your best topsoil gets blown off into the ditch, or heaven forbid, it goes wherever it goes, right? It's gone forever.
There we go again. What is going on? Hold on, guys.
So
Okay.
two,
All right. Here we go
so
again.
about 2006 is when this all happened, right? And so I started looking at things a little differently. I said, I'm paying the bills on this stuff, and we went down the path of strip till. Because we were like all these other farmers, right? We were saying we're no till, but the one thing we'd have to manage was wheat straw post harvest here. And the reason we manage wheat straw is because everybody says, "Oh, wheat straw is so hard to degrade." So we would no till corn into soybean stubble effectively. We would no till soybeans into soybean stubble effectively. We would no till winter wheat into soybean stubble effectively. But trying to grow corn and wheat stubble, which is typically like we like to follow corn after winter wheat, is a bit of a challenge, right? The soil, because of our clay content, stays wet, stays damp. So I went down the path. I bought a strip till machine, imported it out of Minnesota, Soil Warrior. I was a beta test user for that. And it came here in the fall of 2006. And we did that practice till about 2000 and I was on my Nuffield journey. So 2014, I sold that strip till machine, and and I always say to people like, I wish I would have met David Brandt before I met the inventor of the Soil Warrior, which was Mark Bauer. No disrespect to Mark Bauer, because the guy he designed and built that machine with his own intellectual and financial integrity. Okay,
Hmm.
he sold his machinery because he saw that there was an opportunity to finance the development of this machine. So I admire Mark Bauer, for the record, immensely for his um, design, his mechanics, his entrepreneurship, all of these things. But had I met David Brandt before Mark Bauer, my soils would have been even that much better, and I would have kept all that money in my pocket.
Right.
And
Sure.
so,
Sure.
anybody that knows David Brandt as the godfather of cover crops, right? David Brandt, no tilling since the early 70s on his farm in Ohio, and was using cover crops. And when I met David Brandt, it would have been probably about 2000 and I don't know, 2009, somewhere in there. So I'm strip tilling and I'm at a field day in Ohio because there's a demonstration spot for this strip till machine that I owned. And I must have had a logo on my hat or my shirt. And David Brandt's off in a soil pit and points at me with these great big farmer fingers. If you ever met David Brandt, he had hands like waffle irons, right? Great big fat farmer fingers. And he pointed right at me and David says, "Son, I want to tell you something." I said, "Oh, yes, Mr. Brandt, what's that?" And he's like, "I can do way more with roots than you can with that machine right there." And and it just sort of stopped me dead in my tracks because I heard my uncle say a similar story when he was a young man. There was a tillage demonstration day here close to home, and they were dragging the latest and greatest tillage tool across the landscape. Um, and they were demonstrating this piece of tillage machinery with a Caterpillar tractor with steel tracks, right?
Hmm.
And the older neighbor says to my uncle, and I've told this story time and time and time again. The older neighbor says to my uncle, he says, "Henry, I want to tell you something." He goes, "I can do way more with alfalfa than you can with that piece of machinery." And so it was like deja vu, right? And
Sure.
so David and I became really good friends. And David's using at the time when I first met him, he's using oilseed radish uh, and peas, Austrian winter peas with a white corn planter that was on 15-inch spacing. So the rows where he was going to intend to plant the subsequent crop being corn, he would have those big radish roots, and they would open these big vertical channels to allow the corn roots to proliferate. The peas are a legume; they provide nitrogen that the corn will pick up. And then at about the same time, a couple people started to challenge David about his use of just two cover crops, and they needed to be more expansive and grow these big multi-species mixes. And so I went down to David's field day, and here he was. He planted this great big robust diverse cover crop, like 11 different species, and they're over the hood of this tractor that he had at the time, this orange Allis-Chalmers type tractor, an Agco, orange Agco, front wheel assist, and it's over the hood of the tractor, the nose of the tractor, right? And there was like millet in there and sorghum Sudan grass and all these things that I looked at that. And David lives about, as the crow flies, it would be about 3.5 hours due south of me if I drove the car, but I got to cross Lake Erie. So it takes me about, I got to go the long way around the horseshoe Lake Erie. So it takes me about 5 hours to get there. Um, and I'm thinking, if this guy living relatively closely to me, just a little bit south, if he's able to do this in Ohio, I said, why can't I do this at home? And so David and I then formed this friendship, which I'm very fortunate to have had David as my mentor through this journey. And we would challenge each other. We would have these conversations and sort of say, well, what are you doing on your farm? What's going on? And we've always remained in contact. And we forged a really tight friendship, a nice bond. And David, like myself, wasn't afraid to converse and have a conversation. He'd call you up because he's not a texter and wouldn't send you an email, and we would just have these conversations and laugh and giggle and I miss him greatly. Right, like I'm still there's still days where I wish the phone would ring and it would be David Brandt over there to just sort of pick you up and say, hey, what the hell's going on up there in Canada? And that's sort of life, right?
Yep. Yep. Nope. Like you said, I did have the fortune to meet David. I two times, I guess. Yeah, two times I got to listen to him speak and talk to him just a little bit. But I think, like you said, with the size of his hands, I don't think there's any way in hell he could have typed the letters on it to send you a text. So
When he called me out from the soil pit, right? And I wasn't sure. I always joke too. I wasn't sure that day when and he said, I want to tell you something. If he was going to spank me or slap me, like either way, I knew it was going to hurt. So, but yeah. So, anyways, glad I was happy it was just his tongue wagging and not his hands. So that's good.
Right, sure, sure. Yeah. Well, and that's what I was gonna say. You had never met him before that encounter with
No,
him, correct? Yeah,
that's right.
gotcha.
That's right. No, we were complete strangers to each other, really, and why he chose to pick on me that day, it'll forever be a mystery. But I'm happy he did.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you said that was about 2009. Um, and
Yeah, it was
so
somewhere in there, and so then after that, I started playing around and planting my first diverse cover crop at home on my farm. It was right behind my house where I live. There were three species together in my air in my not in my air seeder, but in my grain drill, and and I compared no till with covers, no till without covers, strip till with covers, strip till with no covers, and what I found was by doing nothing and just having the cover crop out there, it yielded every bit as much as putting all the time and energy to doing the strip tillage,
mhm.
right? So I figured, well, I got depreciation in that equation, I've got time in that equation, I've got diesel fuel in that equation that I didn't have by just using the cover crops and just getting them seeded out there. And so then I started down the path of planting some more diversity in my mixes. And typically, we would always use cover crops here forever and a day. And a lot of farmers still do with winter wheat in our rotation. They would frost seed red clover. That's still a common practice to this day. As the ground is fit, they go out there with a little ATV and they spin on, 8 to 10 pounds of seed. Some guys are a little more than that per acre. Really cost effective. It does what it needs to do. But coming back full circle to thinking how the soil was originally covered with an array of big, massive diversity, we started to really ratchet up more diversity, right? More
Hmm.
plant, looking at plant architecture and how that captures sunlight, looking at leguminous plants versus grass type plants, really looking at the four quadrants of cover crops that a lot of people overlook, right? Having that warm season grass, having that warm season broadleaf, having that cool season grass, the cool season broadleaf, and trying to build out a blend, making sure that all four different plant types are represented in that grouping, right? And and for all the obvious reasons that you know we want to be able to have we want to be able to have plants that thrive at different times of the year based on the sun's angle and the intensity of the heat, and you know and we are never taught any of this stuff at university, tragically, and it's still not part of any university curriculum to a large extent, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
um, we're still shaping young minds with um, the idea that bigger is better, right? That
Yep.
we need to somehow continue to ramp up production. And I'm like, well, never once is it mentioned about remaining financially viable, right?
Yep.
And, and so somehow this economy of scale has trumped the conversation, no pun intended, right? Um,
We're
and,
not going to get into politics on here.
and so, but nonetheless, right? The idea that having more is better, I think, is been to the detriment of community. It's been to the detriment of so many things, right? And it has forced people off the land because in order to be economy of scale, there has to be losers. And they don't talk about that. They always talk about being a winner. Um, but in order for me to have more land and more size and scale, I somebody else has to get forced out of the way. And instead of saying to the farmer, your strength is diversity, right?
Hmm.
Because when one enterprise isn't doing as well, the other enterprise is there to buffer that downturn or to consume that crop that you've produced that maybe is not necessarily um, the most advantageous time to sell into the market because the market is soft, right?
Sure, sure.
And you could possibly put it through an animal and turn it into something that has higher value,
Hmm.
you know. And that's sort of where my head has evolved to over time, right? I've gone away from trying to think and do what everybody else is doing and doing what other people aren't willing to do. And I started down that path mostly, not necessarily with the cover crop so much, but by changing my reliance upon um, a Roundup Ready program, and I went back to growing non-GMO soybeans. There's a market here for some non-GMO soybeans, and in that space, I'm able to retain my seed for my own use. And coming back again full circle to the whole financial services adage, right, where the number one rule of financial planning is pay yourself first.
Hmm.
So I started down thinking, okay, how do I pay myself first in agriculture? And that's by not paying for seed on an ongoing basis, soybean specifically, wheat seed specifically, those open pollinated crops. I can retain my own seed for my own use, have it cleaned by a guy that comes in the yard here and cleans it for a fee. And financially, the non-GMO soybeans also fetch a premium that goes in to make food grade products. Those beans are exported across the ocean, and it has made me a significant, tidy little sum of money year over year. And when I compare my non-GMO soybeans, because I still have some neighbors that will share some yield information with me, I'm not losing pace to the latest and greatest technology.
Hmm.
So I find that's kind of comical because here we are thinking, okay, well, these new beans that are introduced every year should be yielding significantly more bushels,
Yep.
right? All of this time and energy and money and resources and capital that's been poured into uh, developing these beans, right, or these varieties, whatever. And yet, my old tried and true beans are still just plugging away, doing their thing. And so, the other thing that we don't talk about at university is the power of epigenetics,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
And no different than in the beef industry, having a closed herd where you haven't brought in any outside genetics. And yet those animals continue to get better over time. They've adapted to your environment. And I believe seed is the same thing, right? It adapts to my soil, to my management, and it just continually gets better over time.
Well, and so to back up just a little bit with kind of your thought process and that little tidbit, talking about economics of scale. Uh, I don't know how it is in Canada. I'm sure it's very similar to here in the United States, but I find it laughable at least when politicians get up and say, "Oh, we have a successful farm policy." And I go, "Well, I don't know how you can say we have a successful farm policy when we have fewer farmers than we ever had before. Small rural towns are dying because we don't have the farmer population. Small rural banks are dying because they don't have the number of farmers to do business with. Small independent co-ops are going out of business. So explain to me again exactly how are we having a successful farm program when the only ones who are having success is getting to be fewer and fewer in number."
Yeah, no, exactly. And I see similar things on our landscape here too. And yeah, and I see it right in my own municipality, which was formerly a county structure, because there is such a wide variance in soil type, which lends itself to the production of high value crops. So right within my own county, I'll refer to it as a county, formerly the county of Kent, which is known as the Garden of Ontario. You have processing vegetables like tomatoes primarily, pickles, dill pickles, right, or cucumbers that are
Hmm.
made in dill pickles, Brussels sprouts. There's a bunch of fruiting trees in certain areas too, strawberries, blueberries, and then you've got the mainstream crops like we talked about, corn, soybeans, and wheat. You actually have a little bit of tobacco that's still grown here, and then you've got some little bit of smattering of livestock, but primarily large and to the largest extent, you have those processing crops, and then you've got a few acres of seed corn that used to have quite an influence here, but now that has collapsed on itself as well. The seed corn industry, as yields of inbreds have increased, that's put some downward pressure, but then also through the consolidation of some of these companies, right? The mergers and acquisitions, the production that once occurred here in Ontario now is being produced elsewhere, and then the final product, essentially the seed, then is bagged accordingly and comes back into the country. But so I tell you all of that because I recognized a long time ago that my input costs are identical to those guys, right? The guys that are growing these high value crops, and that sets the benchmark for land values,
Right.
uh,
Right.
benchmark for the price of herbicide, fertilizer, the tractor that I drive, all of these things, and I have to figure out a way how to be cost effective and cost competitive as those hard costs continue to escalate year over year over year. In Canada, we don't have the same, and I'm not afraid to say this. We don't have the same subsidy structure um, that you guys have as it pertains to corn and soybeans. We don't
Hmm.
have these floors for production, and so I see it as well here that those farmers that have that better soil, that have these specialty crops, their cash flow as a farm business is significantly different than mine, right? Significantly different than mine. The seed corn guys, they're being guaranteed production floors essentially based on their contract of, in some cases, in excess of 300 bushel per acre. Well, as the guy that's buying the seed, my guarantee is zero.
Right.
Right? And it's not that I'm crying over spilt milk. It's just the reality of the situation. So we're living in a society here of haves and have-nots. Um, and so that's where my brain shifts in a different gear of controlling what it is that I can control to make sure and to ensure that I remain financially viable for the long term. And so, if it means that I have less uh, use of machinery, right? Less depreciation on an annual basis, less use of, the tillage tool. I don't have to pay repair and maintenance on those things accordingly. And so, yeah, people would argue, well, you got a depreciable item like your air seeder that's set up for no-till. Yeah, I do. There's no doubt. But by comparison, I'm not pulling a 40-foot land finisher, cultivator, whatever you want to
Right.
refer to it as. I'm not burning all those diesel, all that diesel fuel. I'm not having to pay a man to sit in the seat to do that either. Um, all of those things contribute right back to my bottom line, and I'm happy doing what we're doing, and it's paying the bills that continue to move forward, and that's all I can ask.
Right. Well, and yeah, you have depreciation with your air seeder and your planter. But I do believe that I listened to David Brandt give a talk one time. By listen, I mean watch him on YouTube, about the amount of savings in equipment as far as diesel cost, amount of oil, time, tires, and no-till versus planting into no-till conditions versus planting into conventional conditions. Uh, the savings, you're saving, like on diesel fuel, something like 50% of what it would cost you to be planting into tilled conditions. And that's not even counting the amount of diesel it's going to cost you to go work said ground in preparation for those tilled conditions.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. And yeah, I don't know, like I don't know how we're ever going to change people. And at the end of the day, I really don't care. And like, I don't care. What I
Well,
care, what I care about is the fact um, that as a business, that I'm remaining competitive, right?
hmm hmm well, like you were saying, uh, your family is another example of changing because you had to. You said they switched to no-till because they
Yeah.
lost their soybeans got seeds and they didn't get to sell them, and so that was like, okay, how are we going to survive this year? Just
Yep.
one more example of the endless examples out there of people changing, not because they were convinced by knowledge, but forced
Yeah.
because of financial circumstances.
Yeah.
So,
No, precisely. And I guess, where I've taken it to the next step is the fact that, now that we're not doing tillage of any description after winter wheat and we're using these big covers, right? We're allowing the cover crop to cycle the nutrients. We're allowing the cover crop to die. We're, in some cases, we're consuming the cover crop with livestock. So I've got some livestock in it, reintegration back on the landscape. And that really makes me happy because, again, it comes down to I'm having a stacked enterprise. Like I talked about, we're
hmm
not eggs in one basket saying we're exclusively crop farmers, right? We're having, and if anybody's noticed, the price of beef has gone through the roof, and which has been a long time in the making, obviously, and I hope that the floor doesn't just drop out of it all of a sudden and leave everybody in shambles. But while it's here, it's definitely an enterprise that has been very, very gratifying. For me, going out there and I'm moving these cows on what I refer to as rotational grazing, and not all of our farms are contiguous block, right? They're spread out around the area, but a few farms that are relatively in close proximity, we've got them wrapped with a high tensile wire perimeter fence, and then I use, like, just like most people that are rotational grazing, poly wire, setting up individual paddocks. And for me, going out there and watching those cattle move across the landscape and see what they select, it's been very educational. Um, and where it really starts to get exciting from a crop production perspective is from the little bit of time that we've had cattle back on the landscape to then being able to follow those areas that have been grazed with an annual crop that we have in rotation. The increased resiliency that we've seen in those annual crops has been nothing short of remarkable. And I didn't think in such little bit of time and exposure as it pertains to utilizing grazing, having the manure and the urine out there, having that animal impact, that we would have seen that result, right? I've heard about that from others, and I thought, they're just blowing smoke, right? But in actuality, that has been the biggest eye opener of my farming career that I can honestly say that I have witnessed firsthand.
Yeah,
Right.
and just give people a little bit more context. What's your rainfall? What's your moisture total where you're at?
So during the growing season, I always say we're about 16 inches of precipitation during the growing season. Okay. Most people here tragically don't give a damn about winter accumulation. And I drive across the Midwest. I've spoken in the Midwest, and I was just in South Dakota recently, and they've got their tongues hanging out. They left the fall going out of the fall season being quite dry, having no winter precipitation, and there are a bunch of nervous cats sitting over there,
Hmm.
uh, wondering about what it's going to look like this coming growing season, and why we don't care, or why there isn't much consideration or much attention put on winter precipitation accumulation. That's why guys do so much tillage. If we were like the Midwest, and it's because of our location, uh, in proximity to the Great Lakes and the prevailing winds that come across the prairie, gain momentum across the west and pick up that moisture out of the Great Lakes and then dump it here in fairly predictable rainfall environments through the summer months. Okay, is how I explain it. But if we lived in the arid plain, we would be leaving residue on the surface to try and accumulate any winter precipitation in the form of snow to allow that to percolate and filter down into the soil profile. Well, here on the opposite end of this, we're on the opposite end of the spectrum where tile drainage, uh, we're using tile drainage not necessarily to drain water as much as to manage the water table, as how one guy would describe it, right? So,
Hmm.
um, and in and in all actuality, where I live here, um, our farm fields are almost at level with lake level. The lake being the little puddle lake when you see in the Great Lakes chain, Lake St. Clair, which borders on the state of Michigan and southwestern Ontario. Okay, if you looked at it on a map, you'd see there's this little small lake that's sort of circular in shape, and so our fields here are actually go in, drain into a ditch that was man-made, go in and get pumped up into a much larger ditch, which makes its way out into the river, the Thames River, which opens out into Lake St. Clair and takes the long way around through the Detroit River before eventually ending up into Lake Erie. So that in itself shows where we are here for precipitation and tile drainage, because we are at lake level. When it does get wet, those tiles are there to mitigate that super saturation events that occur, and because clay holds water so tightly as well, um, tile is there for uh, drainage and aeration.
Sure, sure. So you get 16 inches, but you guys are pretty consistently getting 16 inches of precip through the growing season.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yeah. Where we might, I mean, in certain areas of the state, well, I mean, our long-term average is supposed to be right around 30, but last year we probably got 30 inches total, I think. But 8 to 10 inches of that came last week of October, first week of November. So doesn't do a lot of good for the 2024 growing season. but we have a full profile. We were 80 degrees yesterday. It is blizzard conditions outside right now. So that's the kind of climate that we're farming in here on the high plains, um, versus what, like you said, you guys have maybe a little more stable weather pattern.
Yeah, we have more, I'll say, four distinct seasons, right? Spring, summer, fall, winter. We had I would say, more of a colder, sustained winter than we've had in quite some time here, where I am, just north of me, along Lake Huron shore. More so, they've had excessive snow, like a winter from hell. Some would suggest, right?
Hmm.
They guys are just nicely sort of pulling snow blowers off of their vehicles or their tractors, trucks, whatever. Um, and for me, where we are, because we're protected again, I literally push snow once all winter here. I can, right? And so those guys have all of that winter precipitation to allow them to build up their profile. And here we haven't had that, right? We were cold and dry, and that for me, that's a real puts a smile on my face because I love ice fishing. But I'm looking out here across the field right now as we're starting to green up, and the winter wheat is starting to turn on because we've had some nice temperatures, right? We've had some high 60s into the low 70s, just briefly, albeit, but we've had a little bit of precipitation. But I can walk out there on the field for March and not get any mud on my shoes, which is
Mhm.
kind of scary, right? This is when we should be having some precip here to start building up the soil profile before we go into spring, and it's going to be what it's going to be, but we'll figure it out as we go, I guess.
Right, sure, sure. So you met David Branch, you started messing around with cover crops. Um, Talk about your Nuffield scholarship. Describe what the
So
program is and what your
yeah,
journey was with that.
great. So I was fortunate after meeting David Brandt. I was doing my own on-farm research as it pertained to cover crops, and an article came into the mailbox through the Furrow magazine, John Deere's magazine. And I'm not a big John Deere guy, but nonetheless, I do appreciate the stories in the Furrow. They do a really good job, those folks there. And the author of the particular article framed a story about this young lady who her and I have developed quite a friendship. And the story was about their journey with farm succession after tragically losing their parents. And it talked about the young woman who was the focal point of the story, Leona, being a Nuffield scholar. And so I started doing my research about what is the Nuffield scholar and what's that all mean. And basically at the time, the criteria was you needed to be a farmer. That was it, right? And having shared already in the story here today of our conversation, having left my academic pursuits, maybe prematurely, of not following through on that, I always felt like I had unfinished business. And I've the more research I did on Nuffield, the more it really started to resonate with me. The ability to travel, to learn in a team environment. I've always grown up playing a lot of team based sports. I'm a people person, an extrovert, so that all of those things sort of resonated with me. It was right up my wheelhouse. And so as luck would have it, I applied, and I was chosen, right, to go and participate. And Nuffield afforded me to go to 11 different countries over 2 years, so 2013, 2014. I went down to South America, having met similar people on that part of the world, like a David Brandt equivalent, right? Rolf Derpsch is the guy that stands out. He's a long time no-till extension person. I met Frankie Dykstra, a farmer practitioner, no-tiller. I stayed and spent time in Chile with Carlos Crovetto. These are people that in no-till farming circles around the globe would be highly recognized individuals. But like David Brandt, right? They're all getting. Some of them have passed on now, right? They're elder statesmen, and we're losing all of that intellectual capacity, right? That fabric, that continuity of no-till years of expertise that was gleaned right through trial and error, tribulations, things like that, and failure, more importantly, right, to
Sure.
try and perfect the system. And so Nuffield, my takeaway from Nuffield was recognizing the fact that at the end of the day, we farm here just over 1,000 acres in southwestern Ontario, and for all intents and purposes, my farm doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of production agriculture. Um, but what matters is my voice and my willingness to continue to share, and have the confidence to share and say, hey, you are doing some pretty cool things there as it pertains to the environment, as it pertains to your willingness to advocate not only for soil conservation, but the role soil conservation or soil degradation has on shared water resources. That those things are sort of near and dear to my heart as well, and I talk a lot about that. And so Nuffield has been a game changer, both personally and professionally. I've been down to Australia, New Zealand, places that I thought that I would never get to see until I was much older and retired. And how tragic is that?
Yeah.
Because now, like I said, I have then I have then got to utilize what it is that I gleaned through that you know experiential learning, whatever opportunity that came because of Nuffield, and then implement those practices here at home on our farm. And then, how you and I met, right? I've been invited time and time again, to go and share my story on stage and meet some people around the world that I've been able to develop some really cool friendships with, and that has been, for me, the most gratifying part of the whole experience is those friendships that I've met, both with the people I traveled with as well as the people who I've met on my own journey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. What was your favorite country? What's been your favorite country to go and visit?
Well, anybody that knows me doesn't it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that I do enjoy food. Um, much to most farmers, right? You find most farmers enjoy food. That's why we pride ourselves in producing food. Um, but I enjoy the culture of food, right? And here in North America, we're all about the experience of sitting down, intaking massive amounts of caloric intake to satiate our. But when you go to a country, whether it's South America and like Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and you've got that sort of Latin, Portuguese culture in those respective different countries, right? Brazil being Portuguese, Chile, Argentina being more Spanish background, but how that shapes their culture and the food and the dining expertise experience in there, um, those countries stand right out to me, as well as does France, right? France, when you go to eat a meal in France and you sit down, don't expect to sit down and walk out in 45 minutes, much less an hour, right? You're there to enjoy the experience, to enjoy the people that you're sitting there dining with. And um, those are the things that I take away. And that's really what really stands out to me. And if I had to move somewhere today, like if I wasn't living here in Canada and I wanted to sort of contemplate farming somewhere else, the place that I really enjoyed that stands out to me is probably Argentina. There was just something about the culture down there. The thing that Argentina lacked compared to Canada that you take for granted is Argentina does not have the same stable banking environment that we have. Um, the stability of government, those sorts of things, right? That we take for granted. We, collectively will complain about our governments and their mismanagement of policy, whatever. But having a stable banking industry, the ability to walk in, if you have the ability to borrow money, which in farming is obviously critical at various times throughout your career, knowing that you can access capital to expand your business, to make a purchase, right? That was definitely foreign to me, and that's the one reluctancy about moving to a place like Argentina, where they always seem like they're in a state of bit of a turmoil. Um, but yeah, I love the geography. I love the landscape. that mix of crops with cattle, big extensive grasslands. It was beautiful.
Very cool. Interesting. Interesting. Uh, so I know you talked about David Brandt being a mentor of yours, close friend of yours. You've mentioned Carlos Corvetto. Who would be some of the other guys that have been some key mentors in your career down this path?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a friend of mine from France, Sarah Singola. So Sarah did her Nuffield Scholarship in 2011, 2 years before I did mine, and it was Sarah really that really finally pushed me over the edge to get me to apply for a Nuffield Scholarship. And we met just by dumb luck. And again, it comes back to David. David introduces me to Sarah. I was at the National No-Till Conference that year. It was in St. Louis, Missouri. And Sarah and I we spent some time in different sessions throughout the course of the conference. And here was this young woman. She's a few years younger than I am, and was full of life and energy. And she started talking, and I had asked her straight away when David introduced me. I said, "Are you a Nuffield scholar?" Well, her head went around on a swivel because at that time, Nuffield was not even known really very much in the U.S.
It was a secret group, is what you're saying.
Well, it was the fact that Nuffield started throughout the Commonwealth countries, right? You guys had left the Commonwealth so many years ago during the Boston Tea Party, I think, exercise. But um, so Nuffield was not in the U.S. Now it is, right?
Yep.
It's gaining a lot of momentum across the U.S., which is fantastic. But in those days, Nuffield was like not even thought of. So Sarah's head goes around on a swivel, and she says, "Well, how do you know about Nuffield?" And I said, "I was doing all this research." And so she just said, "You got to apply for the scholarship." And she goes, "I think you've got what it takes and you'd benefit from it greatly." And so I'll be forever indebted for her recognizing that I sort of you know, had the skill set to pursue this and just put my mind down to doing it and getting on with it. And so that was at age 40, right? And so here I am, I'll be 40 or I'll be 53 in July. So, um, yeah, no, so it's been good. And so Sarah stands out definitely as a person that I've got to meet. And I've got lots of friends across this country that I've got to network with, and um, various people. But I don't, for fear of missing out on people specifically. I'll just say I have been afforded so many opportunities to meet so many fantastic people that I'm grateful for everybody that has had a little bit of influence on who I am, right? And how it has played out in my own business. And the time people spent with me, and whether they took me out for a meal or whether they opened up their house and I spent the night there, um, or they paid for my accommodations when I was on the road traveling, right? Just sometimes just taking time to have a visit, right? Um, those things have all played a role at some way or shape and time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you said, it's uh it's hard to put into words. Uh,
Yeah,
the uh, the kind of community that I hate using the word regenerative. I really dislike that word just because of some of the connotation it has now. But if you just want to lump that community together, there are just some absolutely fantastic, amazing, friendly people who um, will will take a picture with you when you walk up to them, ask them at a conference, and they don't know you from Adam, and then they give you their phone number mistakenly, and then they end up doing a Zoom call with you here in
that's all.
2025. So,
That's
but
that's what it's all about, really. Like that's what you nailed it with the word community, right? And like mindedness. I I I have come to the opinion that if we don't share amongst ourselves, our story, our journey is going to be quickly muted because this movement is seen as being highly disruptive, and circling right back to that common denominator, the fear of change, right?
Hmm.
That's what people abhor, right? They they hear right away about the stories of success that a few of us have been able to experience. Um, a lot of us, not all of us, but a lot of us have also been willing to share our stories of failure.
Right.
Okay. And I think that that speaks to the caliber and the integrity of the people that are involved, right? Um, the willingness to endure failure and but yet keep your eye on the prize of moving forward is critically important, right? I have said on more than one occasion, like I have learned far more from my failures than I have ever learned from my success, right? Um, and just and that's how you do it, right? You just got to. And I've been fortunate enough that I've surrounded myself with quality people that I know that I can call up, or likewise they can feel free to call me up. I think that's sort of that's the price of membership, right? Of being part
Yeah.
of this group. That that's part of it, right? And when people are struggling, whether it's with their family, whether it's with business partners, whether it's crop failure, inevitably sometimes I found myself having to sit here and not be the one that's doing the majority of the talking, and having to sit there and listen and help people get to the next level. And if I can do that with one person, I remember along this line, my dad was accusing me of thinking I was going to change everybody. And I said, Dad, I said, that's where you got it wrong. I said, I have no intention to change everybody. I said, I only need to change one person. And really, the person I needed to change was, that I hoped to change rather, was the person I was having the conversation with that was looking right at me, eye to eye. I said, I only change one person. And then that person changes somebody, and then that person changes, and on it goes, right? To think that you're going to go out there and change everybody, well, that's the biggest fallacy. And much like David Brandt, right? For whatever reason, he said those words that he said to me, and he was successful. He was able to change me, and hopefully somewhere down the path of life, somebody will then in turn say, well, it was Blake Vince that said this to me on this place and time, and it made me really sit up and take notice. It pissed me off, or it made me laugh, or it made me cry, whatever it did, right? That forced the person to just take a second, take a deep breath, and think differently, right? And if I can leave that legacy, I guess that's where I'm most hopeful, that if I can leave that legacy with one person, maybe two people, maybe three, who knows what that number is, right?
Hmm.
Uh, I will feel like I've been a success, right? And and that's sort of how I sort of lead my life, right? I'm not worried about changing the masses. I'm just worried about making these little subtle changes. Um, and I've always implemented that rule from financial planning to, I'm not interested in hitting the ball out of the park, right? I'm not interested in making exponential rate of return. I'm worried about long, slow, and steady accumulation of growth, right? And I that's sort of what my focus has been about,
Hmm.
just moving ahead, continuing to move ahead. Don't worry about you can use whatever analogy you want, whether it's a sports analogy, hitting the ball over the fence. I just want to keep hitting the ball and play, rounding the bases, having some help from some friends to get me across the plate if I need it.
Right.
And that's my story of life right there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this has been great. It's been perfect as far as the kind of the content I want to capture with these conversations. And I want to be respectful of your time. So I got just a few more general questions here. Um, and I've been asking this a lot lately to different guys. What's your what's your opinion on the future of chemical use? I mean, we've it's been in the news a lot lately. It's been in the news for the last few years. Uh, but what do you think? Is there a way to farm um, without chemicals as far as the commodities system, without doing destructive tillage, or are we going to be in a world of hurt without the use of chemical?
Well, it's definitely on. It's on my mind, right? It's precarious, a very precarious position we're in. I often look at my system here that I have in front of me, and I have no desire to go back to control weeds with tillage, nor do I look forward to having to employ an army of people at our current minimum wage to go and hoe weeds like they did so many years ago, or interrow cultivate. So can we get by with less chemicals? I think absolutely. And that includes fungicides, by the way, right?
Mhm.
I see too many people that are so indoctrinated to chase yield, chase the dragon, as it were, and are pouring on fungicide pass after fungicide pass to maximize output. And at what expense and at what cost does that have on the greater ecosystem? Nobody's paying attention to that, tragically. So that bothers me. There's no checks and balances, as it were. Um, so, and can we get away with less fertilizer too? Like throw that into the
Right.
conversation, right?
Yep.
Um, I see lots of guys out there that still use way more fertilizer than they need. Um, and that has a direct impact on shared ecosystem that we all benefit from, right? Fresh water, fresh water specifically being one of those things that really resonates with me as an individual. So I think it's possible. That old phrase, right? Necessity is the mother of invention, comes to mind, right? When the Allies were running short of rubber, they developed, because of necessity, they developed synthetic rubber.
Yep.
Maybe if we're pushed into a corner, we know weeds are inevitable, right? Weeds are always going to be here, regardless of how much time and energy we spend trying to eliminate weeds. They're part of the landscape. Um, Maybe we need to come up with ways to manage weeds in which they don't even exist right now, right? I'm I am I'm curious to see how AI plays a role in all of this. My son's in sort of that space of AI right now in computer science. Also, technology, right? We're seeing automation, like different swarm type technology. Are we going to have a fleet of robots out there in the field? Are we going to have other tools? Like I just saw this tool for picking an apple, and it looked like an octopus tentacles that sort of graciously and so delicately wrapped the tentacles around this apple and plucked it off the tree. And like, are you going to see similar technologies like that? Like we're today on sprayers, we have like see and spray technology, but you have that technology much like with a hand sort of picker, where
Hmm.
where a machine could go down the field and pull weeds in between the rows of your annual crop. I don't know. Like, I think everything needs to be under consideration, right? But I don't know. Like, it's definitely interesting times we're living in. Um, I don't see it. I don't see it happening overnight. But because the biggest concern in all of this is, in my opinion, because the actual person that's farming, we're what, 1% of the voting population.
Right. Yep.
As our voice collectively gets quieter and quieter and quieter, it's a lot easier to force a small percentage of the population, or mandate a small percentage of the population to effectively change, rightly or wrongly, right? So yeah, like I think that's a bigger concern than anything. If the powers that be that set policy in motion from some ivory tower, wherever that might be located, says
Hmm.
thou shalt not have chemicals anymore, Well, with a stroke of a pen, we're seeing it in real time unfold in other departments across the world. Why should agricultural chemicals be the exception? Time will tell.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think without no matter what, yeah, no matter what anyone's opinion is on chemicals, um, I think it's safe to say we don't know what the long-term impact actually is on the ecosystem, human health. Um, we do know what the long-term impact is of tillage.
Yep.
Um, and so I think we just have to have the discussion, and we need to uh, not sit here and go, oh my gosh, the sky is falling because we're not going to have chemicals. We farmed without chemicals before. It's just we got to figure out a way how to do it without, like I said, going back to full-blown tillage, because we do know what those consequences are. What's the future for your operation? I know you've kind of talked a little bit about it. Is livestock integration going to be more? Are you going to start relying more on livestock? Is that going to become a bigger part of the operation? Um, what are your plans in the near future, at least?
Well, in recent times, as of last year, I had what I thought was an opportunity here unfolding in real time. I brought a new member into the team, as it were. So a young guy didn't have any land, had a bunch of animals. He had a direct to market business already set up, pre-established, and he had some chickens for eggs and meat, and he had some pigs, three little pigs, and he decided to get a small flock of sheep. And so he was using the infrastructure here that I have as far as fencing, as well as some water infrastructure that I already had pre-set up for my rotational grazing. And I thought we could establish somewhat of a FLIRD, as it were, right? So a flock
Hmm.
and a together. Um, and in exchange for that, the person was going to provide some labor in exchange for the space and my infrastructure that I've invested in setting up here and the land that I pay taxes on, right? Um, Tragically or unfortunately, he ended up having to take another job. And what we hoped was going to happen at the outset didn't come to fruition. And he ended up being a glorified squatter, for lack of a better descriptive. And and so, that got old fast, right? He got through the season being here. But what I really hoped would come to fruition with that relationship by doing some other things around the farm, getting him accustomed to moving my cattle that I had grazing, having the sheep follow the cattle to take out some of the less desirable plants that the cattle didn't want. Right, none of that came to fruition, so it was a bit of a disappointment. But what I see as an opportunity going forward to keep bringing people onto the farm that want to get involved with agriculture but can't because it's just too capital intensive, right? There's a lot
Yep.
of people that immigrate to both of our countries respectively still, that have been forced off of their homes, right, in countries where they came from, that were farmers, right? And they still have that, like you and I do, that desire to be a farmer, cursing through their veins. And so if I can engage some of those people that perhaps think that farming is is not within their reach, to say, hey, I need some assistance here. Um, People with some vision, right, that want to get involved. Maybe there's people out there that think there's an opportunity that I haven't even thought of myself. But I'm not opposed to that. I think trying to recognize that we need to get people somehow back on the landscape is my goal going forward. And as well, selfishly, like I said at the outset of the conversation, it doesn't appear that I'm going to have a farm successor. Um, so I'm going to need, as I get older, I'm going to need more and more help from people that want to do the work, right?
Hmm.
And so that's sort of my pursuit. I have a young guy, a neighbor boy that works for me full time, which has been a real blessing. The young man knew nothing about agriculture, right? Didn't have a desire to go on and do any sort of post secondary education, um, but he loves working on the farm. He loves operating machinery. That's his sort of passion. He's pretty handy in the shop. Um, working around tools, doing small engine repair, maintenance, things like that. So, but again, for him to be a farmer, um, it's an uphill battle from a capital perspective, right? So trying to figure that out with him too, and but he is grown by leaps and bounds, as have I, and trying to deal with somebody that's not related to me. Um, not being your own kid, right? It's that line between being the employer and being the friend, which at times those lines sort of cross a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it's been good for both of us, right, in so many respects, and I'm very thankful to have him here. So going forward, trying to figure that out, trying to figure out how do we keep stacking enterprises that can afford us the opportunity to consider hiring more people. Because that comes down to, okay, well, in order to hire more people, you need to have something that is saleable. And I've always said to my wife, as it pertains to the cattle, we need to figure out a way to walk our profit off the farm. Either it's with animals physically and the legs that they have, or somehow attracting people with money in their pocket to have an excuse to come to the farm.
Sure.
And so, and where we are geographically, we have enough human population around us that isn't that far out of a stretch. Like the main highway corridor um, goes right past my farm on a daily basis. There are literally thousands of people that drive by my farm here, but don't have the opportunity to stop because you can't get on or off the highway here, even though there's no exit at the overpass, right? Not that I necessarily want that, but um, the people that go past our farm and see when there's livestock out on the land or whatever, and um, people are noticing. And what I find when I tell that story too, what I find very interesting is the questions that I receive once I've brought the animals back out onto the land from the non-farming members of my society. The questions that I've been afforded by those people as to, hey, that looks pretty cool. What are you doing over there? Compared to the farming members of my society, my colleagues, my peers, my neighbors are mute by
Right.
comparison, right?
Yep.
And, from an ecosystem perspective too, now I have people that come to the farm, not that I'm monetizing from them presently, but they come here to see the birds that are nesting out in some of the habitat that I've created through my grazing management, right? They come here and they're looking for some grassland specific bird species that have found this unique little piece of property, right? That they prefer. And I didn't intend I didn't intend for that, to be part of my story when I set out down this path, but it's gone in this direction, which I couldn't be more pleased, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah, you're like you said, you are in a very you're in a having so many people around comes with its own challenges, obviously, but if you can figure out a way to capitalize on that, to have a sustainable business, to be able to compete with your guys who are with your neighbors who are growing a higher value crop than what you are, if you're able to leverage that to your advantage, why, yeah, then the sky's the limit, as they say.
Right,
So,
right, exactly. And it's just about figuring that all out. And I again, I really don't know what the next steps are. Truthfully, we're just playing it one day at a time. This year, we're just going to go back to just grazing the cattle. I I don't have any intentions to have the chickens here this summer like we had, or the sheep, um, because it just comes down to the common denominator, which is time, right? The
yep,
human capital, and so I don't want to add any more unnecessary um, stress that's a large part of it to what I'm trying to do. Um, but if somebody came along and they said, "Hey, Blake, I saw you did this last summer. Why aren't you doing it? I'd like to try doing something similar to that." You know, I think from what happened and how everything unfolded last year, it's not that I would say no, but I would definitely have a lot a lot more stringent policies in place than I did before, and where it was more of a gentleman's agreement, farmer to farmer understanding, or so I thought of how it should all play out. Um, tragically, we don't all live by our where our word is our bond anymore in agriculture. So many times, farmers that was good enough, right? A farmer's word was his bond.
Hmm.
A handshake was worth everything. Well, now that's not worth the it's not worth anything. It seems like, right? Um, and I try to take people at face value, and sometimes I put a little too much stock in people. So, and that's part of my own shortcomings, right? Too. So,
Well, like you said, uh, it's just another learning experience in the path of life for you. And
oh,
um,
totally, totally.
I mean, obviously, it wasn't meant to be. And yeah, hopefully that you are willing to work with someone like that. Hopefully, someone is also willing to utilize that and offer up their services where they can, or be willing to pay their way type of thing. And just so that, like you said, you're getting the ecosystem benefits of it. You're providing an opportunity for someone who might not otherwise have it, but you're both winners and not one's a winner and one's a loser uh,
Yeah.
in the end. So,
But
uh,
and coming back to your question too, to a certain extent, as I sort of dream about what the next steps look like, and the continuation, as you and I both know, our depreciable costs can continue to go up, right? The price of machinery, repairs, all those things, um, and the margins continue to decline. The thing that really I dream about is, can I or could I, if chemicals were not on the table anymore, could I make an extensive business case for an intensive grazing enterprise? And that that's where my headspace is.
well, yeah, just because, like you said, I mean, the overhead in a livestock operation can be, can be, should be significantly less than a grain enterprise. Uh, and so, yes, you still need a certain amount of economic return, but the amount of economic return you need to be profitable is a lot potentially is a lot less.
Right. But
So,
some would argue that it's not as sexy, right?
oh
And
yeah.
it's no different than how the fire that used to be the chief of the fire department here in my county, my municipality, would refer to a new fire truck as just simply a rolling monument, right? That you see on display out at a fire call. And he said, I'd rather put my money into education and educating people about fire prevention than having to go out and buy a new fire truck.
Right.
And that really started to resonate with me about how I think about things. And it's similar, right? Does the farmer, and that's the thing with a no-till farming approach, okay? Does the farmer, does he gain the satisfaction of buying a 300 horsepower tractor to go up and down the field or go up and down the road with his wagons attached, or his whatever, his air seeder, um, and planting the seed? Or does he get more satisfaction, pulling some great tillage tool behind it and seeing the plumes of dust that come off the back end of that thing? He definitely doesn't get much satisfaction by drawing the Santa Claus parade float down Main Street, right? And
Right.
so when he gets that bigger tractor, the first thing he or she does is, on a conventional farm, is they hook their tillage tool of choice on there, and they want to see, well, how does this thing perform, right? How's it going to handle that extra 30 feet behind me, right? Or extra 15 feet if they go from something that was 25 feet and they put it into a 40-foot tool, right?
Right.
And and I don't, and for me, that doesn't float my boat, right? That's
Right. We
all I.
we we need to check our Tim Allen manly stuff. The I got big tractor. You know, we need
Exactly.
to I mean that's what it is uh gotta
Yeah.
fist pump your chest versus just being able to, like you said, enjoy it, enjoy what you're seeing, appreciate being able to watch a livestock, whatever that is, if it's a pig, if it's a chicken, if it's cows, sheep, whatever it is, appreciate being able to watch them do their thing and then watch the ecosystem benefits of them doing their thing properly and having the birds and not worry so much about thumping our own chest of look at the tractor that I just bought. Ooh, isn't it shiny?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And it is, again, as individuals, right? We're all gonna, and that's the beauty and the curse all at the same time of this business, right? As individuals, we own land as individuals, we should all still be entitled to make those decisions how we see fit. Okay?
sure.
That
Yep.
that never come into question. The problem is in this business of agriculture that is steeped in tradition, when people like myself tend to color outside the lines, okay, go in a direction that is starkly at contrast to the vast majority, right, of the people in close proximity to where you live and reside, then it's automatically sets itself up for criticism and ridicule. And we encourage our children not to participate in peer pressure. But I have said time and time again that peer pressure within agriculture is alive and well.
Absolutely.
And if you are seen as doing something so dramatically different, people automatically think, well, the reason he's doing it different is because, well, something's going on that financially he can't afford to do it. And I said, well, maybe I'm doing it because A, I want to do it, but B, I see a need to do it, and I see an opportunity to do it. Right.
Yep.
So, anyways, that's my story.
Yep.
And
Nope.
I'm not saying that, and again, I'm not saying that everybody should do this, but that's sort of what propels me going forward, and
Well,
I continue to just be so grateful for the people like yourself that I've got to meet and share my story with. So thank you.
well, and I would say I think everyone, farmers would be better off. I mean, I'll say it. I think farmers would be better off. I think you're doing it for not only environmental reasons, you're doing it for economic reasons. Um, you see it as you're more profitable, uh, and society would have a lot better image of farmers if there's more of us doing this. Like I said, I will say it. I'm not afraid to say it. I'm not, again, I can't force anybody to change. I'm not going to make anybody change. Uh, everyone's got to do it on their own. But I mean, like you said, it comes at more than just the environmental benefits. There is the economic benefits to the farmer directly in their pockets. Uh, so
Maybe when I sit here and I think about it, maybe those economics courses I took so many years ago at university have paid off in some way, shape, or form that I really have failed to truly admit or want to
right,
admit. Yeah.
right, right, sure. Well, before I let you go, since I mean, like I said, I really like capturing this kind of content. Uh, and with whatever you want to share, what's your favorite David Brandt story for everybody that you're willing to share?
My favorite David Brandt story. Wow. Um, huh. So, David Brandt and I had been friends for a while now at this point in time, and his wife Kendra was still alive, and David was invited to come here to Ontario to speak, and and David shows up, and he was wearing one of those red famous trucker hats. You know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah. Well, you mean the politics which we will not mention?
Yeah, but and I saw you like he's just trying to wind me up, right? And on this famous red truck, it said "Make soil great again." Okay,
Hmm.
and I laughed, like I just laughed, and he starts to laugh, and the way David Brandt could laugh, and Kendra was there right behind him, and Kendra was in the throes of some cancer treatment, and she had come to me as a with a gift in tow, and it was a quilt that Kendra made, and it's like a Picasso motif of some abstract red and white Canadian maple leaves that I have downstairs on my sofa, and David and I have developed this friendship. And whenever I see that quilt, now that both Kendra and David are gone, it always puts a smile on my face, knowing how genuine David was with not only myself, but every person he ever met. And if there's ever, if, not that I'll ever be David Brandt, but if there was ever anything I took away from David, is to try and be kind, try and be generous with my time, try and be firm with your response, but fair, right?
Hmm.
And I think I, and David afforded a lot of people a lot of patience, right? Um, he was persistent, right, to a fault, right, with people of all walks of life, whether they were politicians, whether they were people in academia, whether they were farmers, whether they were people from his community. Um, you know, and I remember being at a field day at David's too, and there's like 300 plus people in the yard, and he was on like a shared county sort of intersection, and right across the road, the side road that abutted David's farm. The neighbor was out there doing tillage at a time of the year where he should have had no business doing tillage. The field conditions were not fit, and everybody could see that from the road. And here's this guy out there doing tillage just out of spite, because regardless if David had 300 people there in the yard or 30, this man was not going to listen to what David Brandt had to say, come hell or high water, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so that experience of watching that and watching David continue to endure that right underneath his own nose, um, really rang true with me, right? And so I just realized that I'm not going to worry about the people that are around me. If they want to come over and they want to talk, great. If they don't want to talk, that's fine too. Um,
Hmm.
but there's lots of people out there that are very appreciative of learning, of experiencing, of walking across the field, observing. Um, and those are two of the stories from David Brandt that really show up in my mind time and time again. And yeah, and I can. There's days where I'll just sit there and I'll reflect about David, and I can still hear him chuckling and laughing. And yeah, I realize how
No.
I realize how spoiled I was to know him as well as I did.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's like I said, that's great. That's awesome. That's yeah. Very sounds exactly like a David Brandt story. Because I mean, a lot of you guys got them, and yeah, they all have a common motif. Always a chuckle in there, always a laugh, and yeah, always willing to share. So definitely appreciate you sharing that with us. Um, so I guess we'll close with I will share. So Ottawa, this is not going to appear on, well, it might appear, but I'm on the Ottawa County Conservation District board, and we always have a we will be having I believe, our fourth annual summer field day this year, and we're going to have Blake Vince there joining us. So that will be August 12th. That is a Tuesday, I do believe, off the top of my head. So we'll have him down here in north central Kansas on that day. We will be out in the field some. Then we'll have some in the afternoon. We'll have classroom presentation session, I guess you could call it. What else is your itinerary looking like this coming season, Blake, as far as speaking appearances?
Well, right now I'm going to be in Pennsylvania in the month of July, right after wheat harvest. Then I'll come home, and then I'll be down to your event, and then after the same week of your event, I'm off to Nebraska for a talk. And later on in the fall, presently it looks like I'm off to the great state of Minnesota in the month of December. So, so long as the border doesn't get shut down for Canadian travel, I'll be in good shape. I'm really looking forward to it. The common denominator in all of this, politics aside, is really the people, um, the decency between human beings, the tolerance, the likeness, the like-mindedness, the willingness to share and build communities, build people's resilience for their businesses. That's what I'm all about, right? I try to stay out of the weeds of politics. I try to leave that to other people.
Hmm.
I'm very proud to be Canadian, though I'm not afraid to state that publicly or professionally, right? But no, truthfully, and as longstanding allies of longstanding neighbors of each other, um, I think that we have a lot to benefit as we should from each other, right? As
Yep.
both sovereign nations. Um, and we need to recognize the fact that we are indeed two distinct countries living in close proximity to one another, and it's been like that for a couple hundred years, and I don't see why that shouldn't continue to be the case for quite some time yet to come. So yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if it wasn't for Canadian culture, we wouldn't have the Red Green show. So
Or Canadian maple syrup, or
yeah, I know, but I mean, I always joke with any Canadian that I meet that, oh, Red Green is a national treasure to you guys. Like, I hope you guys really appreciate him. I sure appreciated him growing up watching him on public television. So, total guy humor. Uh,
no, that's
w
good.
women w women can't fathom and can't appreciate and understand. So,
Yeah, no,
uh,
he's a Canadian icon, that's for sure.
where can people find you on social media or get a hold of you? Whatever you want to share.
No, that's fine. So if people want to get in touch with me, usually they can find me on X, right? Formerly known as Twitter. That's sort of been my platform that I've used forever. So it's at Blake, so at BLAKE _ Vince, VINCE. That's usually where you'll find me. Most times, right? I'm backing off from where I have been as far as most posts that I've made recently, but I am still out here in the greater cyberspace. Yeah, and that's the best spot to typically find where I am, what I'm up to. This time of year, I'm not doing a lot of posting, but as the grass starts to green up and we kick the cows outside, I might share a few things of what's going on here on the farm at times. And yeah, that's about it.
Yep. Okay, nope, awesome. Yeah, guys, don't be afraid to look him up. Just look up Blake Vince on YouTube. There are some more, I guess, into the nuts and bolts of the farming operation out there. There's a podcast from No Till Farmer. You can find that on their podcast page. I know he done an episode. If you just look up Blake Vince, he done a podcast with another outfit not that long ago. Shared a story. So by all means, if you're looking for some more info on him, it's out there. So thanks again, Blake, for hopping on here and having a conversation. That was great. And we will definitely be in touch as we get closer to this summer for the field day. So.
Yeah, I look forward to it. And I just want to say once again, thanks for providing the opportunity or the invitation to share my story. And it's always good to be to be out there, right? And be honest and upfront and try to encourage any audience that, hey, this stuff isn't easy, but it's well worth its pursuit. And once you get it figured out and you start to, it's sort of like swimming, right? You start to tread water, and then before you know it, you're floating, and then you're doing the front crawl. And that's sort of how I go about my business here. It's not without its anxiety at times, or stresses, but when things start to click, man, it sure is gratifying. So thanks again.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Thank you. If you've stuck with us this long, hit that like and subscribe button. As always, leave a question, leave a comment, and thanks for watching.